And we are off and running for week 6 of college football on a Thursday night. Appreciate you stopping by here at the Voice of College Football. Leave those comments and questions there in the chat. I will get to them. And of course, phone calls. The call-in line has been posted in the chat. And we are ready to go to talk some college football tonight. We appreciate your patience and being about an hour late. Here's the deal on Thursday and Friday night is that we will go live after the games if there are good games. And who is to say they are good games or not good games? Well, fortunately, that's up to me because it's our channel, but I make the calls. So if it's a good game, what I deem to be a good game, a good matchup, a Power 5 kind of matchup, then we will go live after the games, as we did last weekend with the Miami Virginia Tech game and Washington Rutgers. But if we've got lousy games or only one game, then we will come on during prime time, scheduled at 8 p.m. Eastern time tonight. Again, we apologize for being late. All right. We do appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. And again, I am just going to review week 6. That's what we're doing tonight, reviewing week 6 or previewing, week 6. And of course, going to take your comments, your calls, and your questions. I had several conversations tonight about this baby right here. So October 29th is coming. Why is October 29th significant? October 29th is the launch of our new book, Disputed National Champions. If you love the history of college football, then you will love this book. If you love breakdowns on scenarios and situations and results and the rankings and the results and the aftermath, if you like not just a history book, but basically taking all of these seasons during what we consider to be the most formative, transcendent time of college football, if you could select one decade of college football that is the most impactful toward determining the way we crown champions, this was the decade, the 1990s, because we went from strictly poll champions to the implementation of the Bowl Coalition. If you're unaware of what that is, it's all right here. And then on into the BCS era. And then we place all of these seasons, each season during the 1990s, we place ahead into the BCS era, the 4-team college football playoff era, the 12-team playoff era, and now the proposed 14-team playoff era to show you what each season would have looked like under those different formats. So we're happy to release this. The publishing company that we worked with did a fine job as well. So we're excited, and we will tell you more in regards to securing one of those. So here we go on a week 6. And again, we'll take your comments and questions there in the chat. And of course, the calls coming in. Anybody with a comment or question? Don't see anything right now. All right, here we go to week 6. And tonight on ESPN2, currently, we've got Texas State and Troy. I don't know what's going on with that game right now, and I'm guessing that none of you care. That's my guess. Maybe one, maybe two. Sam Houston to UTEP. That's a game that we all can catch here in just a few minutes on CBS Sportsnet. So there we go. The group of 5 spotlighted on a Thursday night with Texas State taking on Troy and Sam Houston against UTEP. And there's an NFL game on as well. And I don't know who's playing in the NFL. I know that I was leaving a friend's house and they were getting ready to turn on the NFL game. Jacksonville State and Kennesaw State on a Friday. Houston, TCU. The Cougars might be the worst team in the Power 5. And notice I'm still saying Power 5 because the Power 5 is not extinct. There is technically still a Power 5, and there appears to be a Power 5 in the future as UTEP is the latest to join the Pac-12, Looks like it's 7 right now. UTEP. All right. So we do have the Power 5 matchup between Houston and TCU. TCU defeated Kansas last week. And so Kansas is really having a rough season under Lance Leipold unexpectedly. ESPN game there with TCU taking on Houston. The game that I will watch first and foremost, of course, I'm going to have these 2 Power 5 games on. Michigan State, Oregon. Jonathan Smith returning to the state of Oregon to take on his old nemesis, Oregon. And Michigan State blasted by Ohio State last week, but they played a pretty solid first half. Had a 10-7 deficit in the second quarter before losing 38-7. Oregon starting to get going after the rough start, and they have rolled their last 2 opponents, Oregon State and UCLA. So Michigan State at Oregon, our point spread on that game sits at 23.5, which reminds me, we did our record this afternoon as we do each and every Thursday afternoon with Steve Merrill from Wager Talk. So please check it out as we went through most of the major games for this Saturday. And those are posted on the various team channels. And of course, you get Steve's Under the Radar selection exclusive as a premium YouTube member, or go to patreon.com/MarkRogersTV and sign up for Steve's Under the Radar selection, which is 24-7. 24-7 against the spread since week 1 of 2022. Michigan State, Oregon. I'm looking forward to that one. Yes, it could be a blowout. It's projected to be one, but I do think that Michigan State could put up a fight. Syracuse, Kyle McCord having an outstanding statistical season at UNLV. Of course, UNLV's made big news this year for 2 different reasons. They are a ranked football team. Nobody anticipated that. They have 2 Power 5 wins over Kansas and Houston, and they keep winning. They are undefeated, and they could knock off their 3rd Power 5 opponent on Friday night. That's on FS1 at 9 Eastern time. And the other reason why, of course, UNLV made news this past week is that their starting quarterback took himself off the team, out of the lineup, and decided to redshirt, which to me just flat out means you're gone. You have now chosen to hit the transfer portal, and you will be in the transfer portal as soon as it officially opens, and you may even already know your destination. So UNLV won its game with a backup quarterback this past weekend, and now they will take on Syracuse in what could be an entertaining game. We could have 3 decent ball games. I'm expecting the Syracuse UNLV game to be the most competitive. Vegas is a 6.5-point favorite against a Power 5 team. That's how far Barry Odom has brought this football program. And not just a Power 5 team, a decent one. Like, this is not Kansas circa 2018. This is not Rutgers circa 2018. This is not Wake Forest circa now. This is a decent Syracuse team that has already defeated Georgia Tech, should have beaten Stanford if their coach didn't go brain dead in the final 3 minutes of the game. So I believe that's going to be the most competitive game on the night. Michigan State, Oregon is going to be the game because of possibly impacting a championship race in the Big Ten. If Michigan State can hang, that is the game that I'm most interested to see play out. And then again, Houston to TCU. Any of these Big 12 games could turn out to be just fun games to watch, even if the 2 teams are awful. And how bad is Houston? They're a 16.5-point underdog against the TCU team that up until last week did not show a pulse. Then we move on to Saturday. And again, folks, the call-in line's available. The link is in the chat. And again, we'll take your comments and questions here at the Voice of College Football. On Saturday, we've got UCLA at Penn State. Penn State priming for that big matchup at the Coliseum the next weekend against USC. We would expect this to be a blowout. UCLA, this is, with all the unpredictability of college football, this has been one of the more predictable demises in college football, has been UCLA. From decent team, Chip Kelly is the head coach, D'Anton Lynn is the defensive coordinator, and one of the best defenses in the country statistically, to just not explosive, not consistent, turnovers waiting to happen constantly, bad defense, bad everything. Deshaun Foster, a big learning curve in front of him. And UCLA is a 28-point dog, goes to Penn State, coming off a hard-fought win against Illinois. I don't know if we should be impressed with Penn State defeating Illinois. I think Illinois is a decent team. I think they're a top 35 to 40 team in the country, but Penn State really had to slug it out against Illinois. That was not a pretty affair. They could not separate. And when I say they couldn't separate, I mean on the scoreboard and at the wide receiver position on pass plays downfield. Penn State could not separate from Illinois. They won that game, I believe, 21-7. And it was 14-7 with 4 minutes left in the game. So Penn State hosting UCLA. Missouri and Texas A&M, intriguing game here. Consider that neither one of these teams has lost a conference game. And I know it's early in the season. This is the last weekend of September, but Texas A&M is now 2-0 in conference play, and Missouri won its lone conference game against Vandy. So important for the winner, because the winner then starts to gain a little traction, maybe a little consideration that they actually have a chance to do something in the SEC this season. Texas A&M, again, a slim favorite at home on ABC. That's a noon Eastern time game. And most likely you're going to get an instant analysis video out of me on Texas A&M, Missouri, because I want to watch that game. SMU, Louisville. Cardinals should bounce back, is about a touchdown favorite against SMU. SMU blasted Florida State. That says little about SMU. They're not that good. That says more about how atrocious Florida State has been this year. Is the biggest disappointment in college football. SMU won by 26 points against Florida State. Who would have, if you would have told somebody a month ago, SMU in week 5 is going to beat Florida State by 26 points. Louisville got a gift on the opening kickoff and took it in for a touchdown and led Notre Dame 7-0. But I just took in the extended highlights of that game yesterday, and Louisville got bludgeoned by the Notre Dame run game. So Louisville's a touchdown favorite against SMU at home. That's a pretty important game, of course, for Louisville. It's a conference game, and Louisville is looking to get to the ACC championship game, which at this point appears to be a tussle between Clemson, Miami, and Louisville. Clemson and Miami do not play this season. Louisville and Miami play in a few weeks at Louisville. And Louisville and Clemson also play. So 2 of the 3 games that we would like to see in the ACC will be taking place this season. Welcome into the Voice of College Football. We've got the real MVP on the line.
Hey, Mark, how are you doing this evening?
I am doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. To me, this was a weaker schedule of games than your average week of college football. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yes, sir.
There's only one top 25 matchup. I thought with conferences expanding, we would get more top 25 matchups, but for this year, it feels like the schedule's been really light a lot of the weeks. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, I think your observation is anecdotal. I'm not saying that you're incorrect, but I would have to go through and add it up versus making that comparison between previous seasons. But as I believe we have discussed at some point, yes, bringing good programs together in the same conference would create more good matchups. Now, whether they're ranked matchups, they should be, i.e., we've already seen Oklahoma, Tennessee, We've already seen Michigan, USC. Those are only 2 examples, and there will be more, of course. Ohio State and Oregon are only a week away, and other games. So, yes, that is a byproduct and should be of these conferences becoming stacked with better teams. So, again, I hear what you're saying, but I don't know that that's true or not.
Right. I haven't done a statistical analysis of it. The only thing I'm just using is my intuition. And so you may be 100% correct. To me, the 7:30 slate of games this week is by far the most intriguing slate of games this week. Nothing other than SMU Louisville really feels like it's going to have a whole lot of weight in the college football world. Maybe Texas A&M, Missouri, but based on the way those teams have played, not a whole lot. Meat on that bone. Mark, if Florida loses this week to UCF, is this Billy Napier's final game?
So that's kind of curious because, as you well know, Florida's coming off a bye. And their previous game was, what was their previous game? It was not the Texas A&M game. Oh, they beat Mississippi State. Yeah. So they go to Mississippi State and beat the team that I think has established itself as the worst team in the SEC. And so, sure, they got the job done. They won the game fairly easily, but you hire and fire coaches and make decisions based on long-term impact and not just a response from one game against the worst possible opponent on the schedule. So I expected there to be a change after Mississippi State and for them to have something in place with a bye week to take advantage of the new, it's not going to be a new coaching staff, but at least a new head coach, interim coach in play to finish out the season. So I don't know if there's any hope for Billy Napier, if that's what that's telling us, or simply that we've not gotten the call from the bank that has told us that, the boosters have, deposited enough money for us to pull the plug, or what that's telling us. But typically the bye week is the perfect time to get rid of the coach, and they did not do that. UCF just lost to Colorado by 4 touchdowns. So if Florida can't win this game on the road, and they're actually this should not be, Florida is a 2 or 3 point dog to a marginal UCF team in the swamp. That, yes, from the standpoint of enough is enough, you would think that this could be Billy Napier's death knell, but you would think logistically they would have pulled the plug almost 2 weeks ago.
Right. I mean, Florida's fallen from 2020 with Dan Mullen to being right there on the cusp of a playoff to being underdogs at home to Central Florida. They might legit be the 5th best team in the state of Florida, Mark.
UCF and USF. They could be.
Yeah, it's very sad times in the state of Florida. Florida football in general has no teams outside of Miami. It's just Miami and a lot of trash, which is really amazing considering all the talent and stuff in Florida.
And 5-0 looks good. And I do believe that Miami has a really good football team. I think they have a talented football team, but really they haven't done anything that's been ultra impressive besides blowing out teams that they should blow out. But considering what they did last Friday night, they have a lot to prove in my eyes.
I agree. Well, Mark, your favorite thing to talk about, College Game Day, is going to that game. That tells you how many great quality football games there are. They're going to Miami Cal.
They're going to Cal for the first time ever, I understand.
It tells you the quality of games on this week, that Cal football, because Cal hasn't been any good. I mean, they lost to Florida State. That's all you need to know about Cal football. Anybody that loses to Florida State this year is just a complete terrible, objectively terrible football team.
If you were going to what you consider to be the best with no political or corporate revenue thoughts in mind of, from ESPN standpoint. I think they're playing off of the Miami 5-0 start, and they're playing off of the Cal first game on the West Coast as an ACC team, kind of this novelty of, we've got a team in the ACC on the West Coast, and we're going to just have this kind of strange game as our featured game this week. What would you select as being the best game of the week?
Well, the problem is the two games that I think are the best. They've already been to those sites: Missouri at Texas A&M, and then Ole Miss at South Carolina. I think those are two great matchups with two high leverage situations. Because if either Ole Miss, that's at the noon game, both of those. If either of them lose, Texas A&M or any of those four teams lose, it's really hard to see how they make the playoffs, because Missouri's just had a track record of being horrible, with the double overtime win against Vanderbilt, a 9-point win against Boston College. This would be Texas A&M's second loss. For Ole Miss, it'd be their second loss, and for South Carolina, it'd be their second loss. So it's that, to me, those are the two most important games. Outside of that, honestly, it's probably the SMU Louisville game. A 4-1 versus 3-1. Feels like if SMU wins, they've got the inside track to the ACC title game, if you look at their schedule. And then for Louisville, I mean, they need this game. It's probably third hardest game on their schedule outside the Miami-Clemson game remaining.
I know that game day did not go to Tennessee, but they featured Tennessee at Oklahoma a couple weeks ago, or otherwise, even though this is not a great matchup, they might have opted for Tennessee-Arkansas. That is the primetime game on ABC.
Yeah, maybe, but man, it's just hard for me to imagine Arkansas with how bad they are to get game day. I mean, they just find ways to lose, Mark.
Cal is getting game day.
That's true.
Now, you as a diehard SEC guy, you got to elevate Arkansas over Cal.
I mean, anybody's above Cal. I mean, Cal doesn't even care about Cal football, Mark. I mean, they've got like 3 fans. They're an irrelevant football program. Yeah. I mean, they just let the Pac-12 explode and just was waiting around and said, I guess we're going to the ACC. That's how much they care about football. Yeah. And people were genuinely questioning if they were going to shut down their football program. They haven't been relevant since Aaron Rodgers was there.
And that's why it's embarrassing for Auburn and Florida State to lose to that football team.
Right. It's also embarrassing for Florida State that the Clemson-Florida State game didn't get game day this week instead of Cal did. Just tells you how bad Florida State is.
Yeah, if we would rewind to pre-week 0 of what we thought of all these teams, that would have been the obvious choice, right? That would have been it.
Right. And now they're only 13.5 point underdogs only, like genuinely only. I don't know how Florida State scores 3 points, and I don't know how Clemson doesn't score 35 points in this game, Mark. I mean, Clemson has shown the capability of pulverizing bad teams. I mean, they destroyed App State. They've destroyed a few other cupcakes they've played this year. So,
Stanford, yeah. I kept checking in on Florida State at SMU, and every time I checked in, SMU was running, without resistance. Some running back, Brashard Smith, or somebody was running for 20 or 25 yards downfield, and Florida State just gave another lackluster performance. For them to lose to SMU, there are few teams in the country playing power conference football that would lose to SMU by 4 touchdowns. Yeah, this FSU situation is becoming quite interesting.
Mark, they legitimately be one of the worst 25 teams in all of college football, including the group of 5, Mark. I'm not trolling. I'm not, they are legitimately a horrendous football team.
Yeah, they would be 0-6 if Cal had a field goal kicker.
Right.
And let's see what it looks like. So unless they pull off a fairly major shocker, they will be 1-5. And then we see they go to Duke, which who knows what's going to happen there. But at least Duke's playing for something. At least they've got their pride and they're playing hard. So I got to think that give me Duke in that game. The way things stack up right now, then they go to Miami and they should get slaughtered. And then North Carolina, I understand that they're not a good football team, and then they've got to go to Notre Dame. Charleston Southern gives them a give me win, and Florida. That Florida State game, I'm going to have to go down through history and figure out when was the last time that this game was as pathetic as it's going to be when these two. It's got to be pre Bobby Bowden, Florida State, where both of them were just this atrocious and unwatchable.
Right. And that's kind of the only thing redeemable for Florida is they're not Florida State this year. Seriously.
So what's your yeah, they at least came into the season with the expectation that they would do nothing and fire their coach. Like, this is just a big surprise to Florida State fans.
Right. They're stuck with Norvell.
What would be your final record prediction on Florida State?
Good gosh. Ceiling's 3-9, floor probably 2-10. Floor, they could lose to Charleston Southern. Like, I'm not even trolling. They could lose to Charleston Southern. I don't know anything about Charleston Southern. I don't know a single player, a single coach they've ever had. But that'll be probably the biggest game for Charleston Southern's football history. And Florida State lost to Jackson State a few years ago at home. And that was a much better team than this team is. So it's not without a realm possibility they go completely winless. But I think 2-10 they'll upset Charleston Southern, Mark, in a thrilling 3-0 type of game, and come away with the W, and end up 2-10.
I'm going to go 3-9.
I just don't see them be. They just haven't been competitive. Is my issue. They're just not competitive enough to even sniff an upset.
We are deep enough to reel into the season to try to peg a few teams that could actually make legitimate noise that are regular doormats, like Rutgers. And the reason I bring this up is Duke was right in our faces there. They're 5-0 is Duke. And if we look at their schedule the rest of the way, maybe Duke does something here. 5-0. They've got a date at Georgia Tech. Now, who knows who's going to win that game? You know, Duke's 5-0, but that doesn't mean anything. They could easily lose that game and nobody would bat an eye. But then there's that Florida State game. SMU and Duke could be a huge game in the ACC. Miami on the road, NC State, Virginia Tech, Wake Forest. Rutgers kind of fills that bill for me as well, to reel. Well,
Indiana. I'm not sure if you see ESPN, FPI, the playoff analytics. Indiana's got a 40% chance to make the college football playoffs, according to ESPN.
40%?
Yeah, 40%. They're about a 70-30% chance to beat Michigan now.
Can you imagine?
I'm not making that up. If you go to click on the Indiana-Michigan game, it'll say like 68.1 to 22 point something.
Oh my goodness. Look at that, Michigan fans. The matchup predictor, Michigan with a 32% chance of beating Indiana.
Yeah, I looked at Michigan, because I saw that. I thought there's no way that's even close to accurate. I think Michigan will probably win that game. But ESPN's FPI thing has Michigan going 7-5 if they're right in every single game.
Now, what information ESPN should supply us is how accurate their indicator is.
Right. Well, listen, I just thought that was pretty hilarious. I mean, I don't think it's been that long ago you'd have to go where that statistic is anywhere close to accurate in Indiana's favor man. But Indiana, you look at their schedule, I mean, they could be legitimately 9-0 going into that Michigan game. And if they go 10-2 and doesn't make the Big Ten championship game, they're probably in the playoffs. I know it's weird to say, but a 10-2 Big Ten team's probably in the playoffs.
10-2, respectable loss to Ohio State. Maybe they lose to...
I'm assuming they lose to Michigan as well.
Yeah. So if they lose those two games by a score, I want to see a logjam of teams, and they're most likely going to be Big Ten, SEC teams, that the College Football Playoff Committee is going to have to make a decision on. I don't want to see a clear cut. And of course, the further we take this expansion field out, now that we've gone from 4 to 12, the less people are really legitimately going to be pissed off about number 12 being left out. But for us hardcore fans, there are going to be more and more difficult decisions for the committee to make. It just broadens the opportunity for more teams to be log jammed that have to be determined. That's going to make it fun to watch them squirm and dodge and try to figure it out.
I think the odds of that likely is almost 100%, Mark, with just the sheer volume of teams and how the conferences are going to beat each other up, especially this year with the equality, the parity between the middle of the conferences. I mean, I'm not sure if you saw this week, but Michigan's a 2.5-point underdog to Washington.
Yes.
I can't explain that number or any way, shape, or form, but to me, that just speaks to the parity of even the Big Ten, where you have arguably the third or second best Big Ten team, probably underdog to what, the 10th or 11th best Big Ten team? I mean, Washington's not a good football team.
No.
But yet they're favored over a proven Michigan team, proven of being good teams like USC. So
the other thing that's in play in the Big Ten that I don't see in the SEC, I don't think there is a real possibility of a surprise SEC championship game. I'm looking at Alabama, Georgia, Texas, and then if you want to go Tennessee, probably is the fourth most probable team to make it. Outside of those four, I wouldn't be shocked if Ole Miss is able to put their act together and get there. But I just don't see a surprise SEC championship game like Texas A&M making it, Missouri making it, somebody like that. But in the Big Ten, because of the way these schedules are put together, Indiana, Rutgers, and then you've got this contingent of 6 teams in the Big Ten: Ohio State, Michigan, Iowa, Penn State, Oregon, USC, where they hardly play one another. And you could just have a logjam of 8-1 teams.
do you know, have they released the tiebreakers? Do we know the tiebreakers?
Yes, we do. It's a pretty formulaic NFL type tiebreaker of, obviously, if it's a two-way tie, the head-to-head, and then you go to the common opponents configuration, and then you go to so let's say you go common opponents, and that eliminates. What that's going to eliminate is next to no one, because most likely, if they only have one loss, they will all have lost to somebody within that group. It's unlikely that one of them loses to somebody outside of that group. It's possible, but that will eliminate that team or those teams. And then it goes to something that I don't agree with. It goes to going through the conference from top to bottom and determining, like, if you're matching Oregon versus USC, okay, they both, if Ohio State's the 1 seed, what's their results against them? Then you go to the 2 seed. Is that Penn State? What are the results? And whoever had the positive result against the highest seeded team then goes to the Big Ten championship game.
That doesn't seem pretty fair and equitable, in my opinion, Mark.
No.
How do you think? Why don't they just go back to like split Big Ten championships and stuff like that? If it's going to be a 6-7 way tiebreaker, I know the playoff you have to get it, you have to have it, but with them going to 14 and the SEC and the Big Ten assuming to get the 2 buys, why don't you just do split titles at that point? Because let's be honest, there's nothing to prove in these conference championship games anymore.
Well, somebody has to receive the bye.
Right, but I know you're going to hate this, Mark. What I think they'll probably end up doing, but I think they'll just have the committee decide of who the best teams in each conference is. And I think most years it'll be pretty clear cut.
Yeah, Corey Brad and I were talking about this, and he's trying to put together a path, of course, for Iowa to get to the Big Ten championship game. And I said, well, let's say if you lose as expected to Ohio State, then you want Ohio State just to roll the field and beat Oregon and beat Penn State and beat Michigan, because you just want them to take up a spot and give all those other teams a loss. And then you need to win some kind of crazy tiebreaker at 8-1.
Hey, Mark, normally I know you don't allow other guests to hop onto the stream, but the great Corey Brada wants to hop on. So I feel like he deserves like a special privilege type pass, you know?
Well, Corey does do some heavy lifting for us here at the Voice of College Football. And I'll actually be asking Corey to do some more heavy lifting here soon, but he doesn't know about that.
First of all,
yes,
a path to the Big Ten championship game.
What?
They don't need a path. Come on. You know, that's funny because here's what I was just talking to somebody about this like yesterday. Shouldn't, because people should be able to make the logical pick by pick we've gone through 4 weeks of the season, 5 weeks of the season, we should be able to do this. But Mark, they've actually got a very good chance of making Indianapolis. Iowa does right now, regardless of Saturday. And I don't care what they can get beat by 60 against Ohio State, and that doesn't change. I believe with a loss to Ohio State, they are in a very good position to go to Indy this year. That's what's crazy about it. Fair or unfair.
It is. And as I was stating, as we discussed just the other day, then they want Ohio State to clear the deck. And give those 3 teams, Penn State, Oregon, and who was the other one? Michigan, losses.
Yeah, and USC would it'd be good if they lost again, which I looked at all these schedules here. I think it was yesterday.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at it from more of a macro standpoint, not micro. So, I know that there's a couple schedules that are more favorable, but when I say they have a good chance, I'm just kind of going off probabilities. Like, I think you and I both know there's a chance that there's 3 or 4 teams log jammed with 1 loss, an undefeated Ohio State, but chances are that doesn't happen. So even though there's maybe a chance, I don't know what the percentage would be, what you'd put the percentage on Iowa dropping another game. But preseason, we talked about how favorable Iowa's schedule is. I mean, it looks more favorable now than it did preseason, because the teams that have emerged in this conference that we viewed as bottom tier teams, Indiana, Illinois, who am I missing?
Rutgers,
those are not the teams that are on Iowa's schedule.
Yeah.
Iowa actually, with the exception being Purdue, right? If I had any choice, I might trade Purdue for Nebraska. That's really the only other way the schedule could get easier. And I'm not saying they can't drop another game, but Darryl, you've seen Iowa's schedule. Have you? I mean, it's hard to pick against Iowa in any game. Maybe Nebraska, but it's at home. Like, who's picking Wisconsin right now? But now they could come to Iowa City and win. But I mean, hey, Ches Malusi just announced earlier today, or there's a report out there that he may be leaving the program midseason.
Wow.
I mean, this is as favorable of a schedule, and I never thought I'd be saying this with the conference realignment and the addition of these 4 teams out west. But with Washington and with UCLA on this schedule, UCLA may be worse than I expected. I think they probably are worse than I expected preseason. I mean, maybe you squint and see a way they lose at Michigan State. I mean, heck, I thought they played pretty well at times against Ohio State. I know they turned the ball over too much, but they still got beat by 31. Northwestern's terrible right now. Let's see, at Maryland, maybe, again, the 2 road, there's 3 road games. 2 of the 3, I guess, are maybe losable. but I think it looks even more favorable. So I'm assuming they lose to Ohio State this week, and I'm still saying there's a good chance they make Indy.
You're right. I think it's actually probable that there is a tie for either first or second place
I
in the
concur.
Big Ten.
I agree, and I went through the tiebreakers with Coach Patterson privately. I think it was yesterday, and you're absolutely right. You went through the first few. Do you mind if I read those tiebreakers for people?
No,
verbatim?
go to it.
Let me just find these real quick because I just went through this yesterday. So the Big Ten announced these back on August 26th, 2024.
Mark, can you pull up the super chat we have while Corey's looking for those?
Sure, I am looking.
Corey will appreciate the super chat. It's a great benefit to him personally,
Oh, great.
spiritually and emotionally as well, I would argue.
Are they directing the money to me directly? Is that why it's beneficial?
No, but it's going to help your mental and psychological state, in my opinion.
I, as a good producer, am going to accompany Corey's reading with the actual rules or tiebreaker guidelines here. There we go.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, so teams, again, head-to-head, as you mentioned, and then record against all common opponents. And then, you're probably going to end up at number 3 in a lot of cases because, I would just have to assume because this basically comes down to who did you lose to, right? That's what number 2 comes down to between the teams that are tied. And then number 3, the third down the ladder, is the tied teams will be compared based on record against common opponents with the best conference records. So basically, what's your record against the best teams you played in conference? There is nothing, and this is something that I want to say in the past, and I could be wrong, you probably know better than I do, Mark, but in the past, there has been, at least in some conferences, I don't know Big Ten, but one of the tiebreakers at some point down the rung was out-of-conference record, correct? Like they actually looked at out-of-conference total record, I should say.
Yes. I don't think that's across the board, but yeah, there were conferences that had that stipulation.
Big Ten does not have that. So to Iowa's favor, given the one loss to Iowa State. So the loss to Iowa State does literally nothing as it relates to Iowa and the conference race, not even in the tiebreaker scenario. Then number 4, the tied teams will be compared based on the best cumulative conference winning percentage of all conference opponents. Number 5, the rep will be chosen based on the highest ranking by Sports Source Analytics. And then, of course, you have to have one that's just the end-all, be-all, which is number 6, random draw by the commissioner. So, hey, they could lose out on a tiebreaker. But what I'm saying, and I think Don and I talked about this in the show Monday, is I would have to think if you weighed all these probabilities together, assuming Iowa does run the table, and you can't really assume that, no guarantees here, but boy, that schedule's favorable. There's a better chance they get to Indy with one loss than there is with one loss not getting to Indy, if that makes sense.
Well, their downfall could be, now you would much rather have an easy schedule to obviously finish with a good record to put yourself in this position. But number 4, if they get down to that 4th tiebreaker, then their weak schedule is going to do them in.
Sure. Yeah, that's true. But I wonder, I like I said, I looked through some of the teams that you read off earlier, like Penn State. Michigan's done, right? Oh, no, I'm sorry. Michigan's not done. USC's done, assuming they lose to – who's on USC's schedule?
Penn State. So
assuming they lose to Penn State, Ohio State plays Penn State, USC plays Penn State. One of those teams is eliminated. Is that fair to say? If Ohio State beats Penn State and then
yes,
and then USC beats Penn State, that's 2 losses for
USC. Not if USC beats Penn State and Penn State beats Ohio State, then they all have one loss.
I guess I'm assuming Ohio State runs the table. So you're right. So then you could have this, like you said earlier, this total mess with all these teams at the top. So I guess, and I was looking at the schedule this week. Really, the only, this is not a real, not to turn attention away from your program or from college football this week, but as it relates to the Big Ten race, this week is not real strong. Would you agree with that? Like, I don't think any of us expect Indiana to be one of those one-loss teams in the long run. Do you, Mark? I don't think we don't anticipate Rutgers is going to be competitive by the time we hit week 12, week 13.
I'll go out on I think Indiana can.
I don't expect it, but their schedules are so weak especially Rutgers.
Well,
Rutgers plays
Rutgers.
USC.
Corey, Indiana's got a 40% chance to make the playoffs, according to ESPN.
That's
Well,
crazy.
but remember, Drill, it's going to be easier to make the playoffs than it is to make Indy.
Yeah, but look at who Indiana plays. I'm not sure if you have access to their schedule to pull it up, but the only teams they play is like you all, except Michigan and Ohio State, and that's it. Everybody else Indiana plays is horrible. And they've proven that they're a good football team this year by dominating everybody and beating Maryland by 2 touchdowns.
So Indiana's going to lose at Ohio State.
Yeah.
And they'll probably lose to Michigan.
Well, I mean, they might.
They may lose. Hey, they may lose to Nebraska.
They could, but they could beat them. I mean, if they do what they did against Maryland, I think Maryland and Nebraska are pretty even teams. I think Indiana's probably the shocking team this year that nobody expected, and they end up 9-3 or 10-2. Like, I get it, they're not a big brand, so nobody cares about them or nobody has any respect for them because they're irrelevant and they're a basketball blue blood. But they've looked like a well-oiled machine. They had 4 turnovers against Maryland and still easily won that game. They could have easily won by 4 touchdowns in that game.
I guess where I come from on this, Mark, and you can tell me my logic is flawed, but with some of the surprise teams in this conference, especially the teams that, even if they're projected to be middle-tier teams in this conference, to this point, through like 5 weeks, the only thing I read into is when teams suck. Like, when you can tell teams suck by now, but sometimes it's still hard at this point to tell how good teams are. We've seen Maryland flash in September, and then they totally fizzle out by the time you hit October, November. And I'm not saying that's going to happen to Indiana, but boy, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find many analysts that would predict that they sweep the board or even end up with the one loss that we're talking about with that schedule.
So you're saying that Purdue sucks.
Yep.
Northwestern sucks.
Yep. Michigan State, even though their record's not terrible.
Yeah, we'll say Michigan State sucks. And Maryland probably sucks. They're already 0-2. Yeah, let's put them in the sucks category. And then after that,
yes, there's still teams that may not suck as hard, but still suck. I guess that's what I'm.
Yes, there is still hope and optimism for Illinois, Nebraska, Indiana.
And Mark,
Rutgers.
I have more faith in Illinois continuing because they've done it before under Brett Bielema. You know, I'm nothing against Cignetti at Indiana, but this is new territory. They had the one flash in 2020 under previous head coach, but in general, this has not been done there. And I would say the same thing about Schiano at Rutgers. They've had 500 seasons there, but boy, this is their best start since his first tenure there. Correct?
Yes. Illinois' got a tough schedule, though. Now, I'm pulling up Rutgers' schedule if I can.
I mean, Rutgers' schedule's not that hard. I think, to Darrell's point,
it's the easiest. On paper, it was the easiest schedule going into the season.
But it's likely they go to Nebraska and lose, and then it's likely they go to USC and lose. Like, Nebraska and USC will be favored in those 2 games.
Oh, sure. Nebraska's a 7-point favorite tomorrow.
So that's why I'm all coming back to this when we're comparing these teams to Iowa's schedule. It's likely, unless Iowa just loses a bunch of players, right? Injuries aside, that even with a loss to Ohio State, they're going to be a favorite in every game left on the schedule. And I don't think it's really going to be all that close. Every game on the schedule, Iowa will be favored to win. Unless something drastic changes between now and then.
Well, give me one more miracle week for Rutgers. Let's say they beat Nebraska tomorrow or Saturday. I keep thinking it's Friday. Then after that.
Yeah, I get that. But I'm not saying it's not possible. I still think there's a better chance they hiccup against Minnesota or they hiccup at Michigan State. I mean, there's still losable games for a program like that.
Yeah, they're not that good that they can't. And they have to play Illinois. Sure.
And so who else are we looking at? We've talked about why Indiana and Rutgers are less likely to finish with one loss.
For me, with Illinois, I looked at their schedule briefly. They have to go on the road to play Oregon, so I think we can disregard them.
Yeah, exactly. They've already got the one loss. Okay, so they're basically eliminated. USC, maybe they, but like I say, if that eliminates Penn State, right? Assuming Ohio State sweeps the board, then that eliminates Penn State from the conversation.
Yes.
USC could lose, I suppose, but again, if we're basing it on the same logic that I'm using for Iowa, USC will probably be favored in every other game but Notre Dame, and of course that doesn't count to Big Ten. So, yeah, I guess there's probably just as good or close to as good of a chance USC finishes with one loss, but again, it's probably going to be either Penn State or USC, not both. Penn State's got a very manageable schedule after USC and Ohio State. So I guess it would probably be better for Iowa's sake if USC, let's see, how would that work, Mark? Penn State doesn't have a loss. So I would suppose it'd be better for USC to beat Penn State and Ohio State to beat Penn State. Like you said, you want Ohio State to beat up on everybody else. But after that, I'd probably rather, I'd have to look at Penn State's schedule and go down the tiebreaker. Don made a very good point. With this new conference setup, without having head-to-heads with everybody and just more teams to figure into this mess, it's sort of, there's going to be computers out there that can do it, but it's very possible that we head into the final week with several teams still in play for Indy.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's very likely just because of the sheer quantity of teams we've got.
And that game, Iowa-Nebraska, which could, those are two teams that are in this conversation. I don't know. Nebraska's a team we didn't really talk about, Mark. I don't know what your thoughts on Nebraska are.
Well, under your scenario, they're going to lose to Iowa. They've already lost to
and they've got USC
Illinois.
and Ohio State on the road.
Yeah, forget Nebraska. This is the team we should look at. This is the team we should look at. Oregon. How about Oregon?
Oregon's a good one. Absolutely. And obviously, a lot of it's going to be decided next week, right? Say Oregon knocks off Ohio State. That could happen.
Sure.
And
Oregon plays Illinois and at Michigan. So
they're going to eliminate Illinois. And Michigan will likely be eliminated, assuming Ohio State beats them, which can't be assumed.
Right. The loser of that game's eliminated. Now, I don't know if we were to, what would be the ideal path for you with that tiebreaker 4. That's where it gets confusing and complex because you need to figure out who you've beaten that's better than what somebody else has beaten.
Yeah.
So maybe it's unfair for me to say that there's definitely a good chance with one loss that I was in because, hey, it looks like maybe you're going to have at least, even if Ohio State sweeps the board, you're probably going to get 2 teams that have one loss in second place. Is that a fair assumption, Mark? I'm no mathematician.
I believe so. Yeah.
So maybe it's unfair for me to say that, but then, tiebreaker, 50-50 chance at that point. No, it's not going to exactly 50-50 because the schedules aren't equal.
You're really at this point rooting for, if you're Iowa, for the Nebraskas of the world, for the Rutgers of the world, Washington, Illinois, those kind of schools to prove that they're pretty good, but they're not going to be in the championship race, but they're going to pull off some upsets that are going to help.
Right. Corey, what you need this week is you need Washington to show why they're a 2.5-point favorite and beat Michigan and have Michigan do some real damage.
I'll tell you what changes everything, Mark. All right. I'll tell you what changes everything. You may say I'm living in La La Land, and I'm not saying it's going to happen, but you know what changes all this?
If Iowa wins Saturday.
Exactly.
Then they're really...
If that happens, think about that. Because then you're looking at the schedule, you're like, holy cow. They just went on their own, beat Ohio State. They got nothing left.
Corey, it's not happening, okay? It's not. It's
fine. That's fine.
It's not happening.
I'm not saying it's going to. I'm just saying
stranger things.
Change everything.
Stranger things have happened, Mark, but it's not happening.
Yeah, I mean,
Ohio State's just a powerhouse.
That's been a house of horrors. Now, Durrell, they did beat him in 17, but that was in Kinnick, and that was not as talented of an Ohio State team. I'll give you that. But
we're close.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, imagine if it did happen, right? Imagine if it did happen this weekend. And that's what I'm saying. Like, aren't you – the fact that we can sit here, me as an Iowa guy, you as an Ohio State guy, Mark, Durrell's a SEC dude, we can sit here and say, yeah, but it's not happening. I know that sounds very dismissive, and that's okay. Because think about that. If this is the mindset, I know Iowa's not going to be like teams shouldn't be looking down the schedule like we are. But if you look at this and say, yeah, we're in a pretty good position without being Ohio State. Well, we just went through. Yeah, we're in a pretty good position. Very favorable. We just went out after that. We'll be fine. Hey, you're playing with house money Saturday. I mean, absolute house money. You got nothing to lose because it don't matter. And let's say something else here. Regardless of margin, everybody talks about, well, losing to Ohio State, that this whole idea, this conversation this week, does 10-2 Iowa get you in with a loss to a good Iowa State team and a great Ohio State team? Margin of loss is important. I don't know that it is, Mark. Not at this point, not with the loss to Iowa State. And you know why it's not important. I think they could lose by 50 and it won't matter because it's likely that it will all be determined in Indy. If Iowa loses in Indy as a 10-2 team, they won't make it. If they win in Indy as a 10-2 team, it doesn't matter what the margin of loss defeat was against Ohio State. They're in at 11-2 as a conference champion, assuming they get in as a one-loss conference team. I mean, absolutely. I guess if they lose out on a tiebreaker as a 10-2 Big Ten team, then yeah, maybe we come back to margin of loss. But boy, if you're talking about 2 or 3 one-loss teams that are in a tiebreak scenario, then you're competing with not only those teams, but other at-large conference teams from other conferences. So this is intriguing stuff. The loss to Iowa State, although I didn't want that to happen, it kind of changes your perspective on everything moving forward, doesn't it, Mark, in a sense?
Well, it's difficult for some people to separate the math from the optics. So the optics look bad when a team like Iowa loses to Iowa State. So the thought is, well, okay, that is super damaging to their playoff chances. Well, yeah, it is. It's not good, but you start to lay out first of all, you separate the playoff race from the Big Ten championship race. Those are two different things. And as you say, it obviously factors in 0 to the championship race in the Big Ten. It just doesn't look good. So people tend to dismiss teams because of games that don't count in the conversation we're having. Texas A&M lost to Notre Dame in week 1, but now they've won 2 games in the SEC. They're 2-0. And they're favored on Saturday to go to 3-0, but they lost a game to Notre Dame, so people kind of dismiss them.
And so, yeah, I guess to sum all this up for a lot of teams, not just Iowa, but for I think probably a number of Big Ten teams, if you don't like your chances preseason of getting in at 10-2 in the regular season, then just hope one of those 2 losses comes out of conference. That's all you got to hope for. Just hope one of those 2 losses comes out of conference because you'll have a better chance of getting that 13th game in your championship game with a chance to prove yourself. If you don't like your chances at 10-2, and a lot of people didn't like Iowa's chances preseason at 10-2, so just be happy it came out of conference because you go 10-2 the rest of the way. That means 1 conference loss and you're in Indy.
So applying that to Iowa, you're right, because I'm a guy sitting right here who picked Iowa to go 10-2 this year and miss the playoffs. But the history over the course of the 10-year playoff at 4 teams has shown us that 10-2 teams from the SEC and the Big Ten will make the playoffs. So I'm getting your point because, again, I just backed it up with my own prognostication and this scenario that we're seeing play out in front of us. But history has shown us over these 10 years that you want to lose the 2 games in conference, then you avoid having to play that 13th game against the best team in the conference and most likely lose.
Sure. I get that side of it. It's all about what you'd rather roll the dice with. At this point, it doesn't matter. If you're Iowa, you know that if you get 2 losses in the conference, you're done, barring some weird stuff at the top. And even that's a different conversation we could have. Would a 10-3 Big Ten champion get in?
No, Corey, an 8-4 SEC team's going to get over them.
if say Iowa lost to Ohio State, Nebraska, then beat Michigan, I don't think they get in. I think the committee. Well, no, they would get in. I'm sorry, because
10 wins you're in, Corey. 10 wins you're in.
No, well, he's talking about it being a champion at 10-3.
Yeah, it's an
right?
AQ. Yeah,
sure,
it's an AQ.
You're in.
That's an AQ. Exactly.
Unless I'm thinking of this backward, I think you want Ohio State to win the game against Oregon, and because they have more tough opponents that could be in Iowa's way. So you want Ohio State just to take care of
Oregon,
that.
or who are you talking about?
Oregon's not playing anyone of much consequence here. It's basically Michigan.
Well, they also get Illinois. They get
those teams aren't going to factor. They're going to be gone.
Okay. You think Illinois is going to be done?
Yes.
I don't know about that, but like I said, maybe.
Did you watch the Penn State game, Corey?
I watched a pretty good Illinois defense through most of that game.
I watched an Illinois offense that couldn't get a first down.
Well,
does that sound familiar to you, Corey, the Iowa fan?
Does that sound familiar to you, a Kentucky fan?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of does. But, all we do is beat elite offenses. I mean, it's nice to have the best defense in the country, Corey. I mean, I'm sorry it had to be taken away from you like this, but, some of us have needs as well. So.
Well, you guys happen to have a head coach who used to play defense at Iowa, so that helps.
No, that's not a happen to. We scouted him out. We got good talent, and now we've got the best defense in all of America.
It's just a good thing that he has a clause in his contract that allows him to leave for the head coaching job at Iowa whenever he chooses.
Well, I think he's more likely to get the Florida State job than the Iowa job. So
I think he wants another job. Didn't he have a chance to get the A&M job in the offseason?
Yeah, A&M wanted him, but the fans didn't.
Why would he leave for Florida? Well, yeah, but I don't know that he wanted.
He started at Florida State.
Florida State's been that's a different conversation, Mark. I don't know.
You remember what Kentucky was before Stoops got there? We were worse than this Florida State team.
I'm not saying that a team wouldn't pursue him. I'm saying I don't know that he wants to go anywhere else besides maybe Iowa.
Yeah, maybe. I hope not. I love my head coach. We got one of the best head coaches in America. We're going to go 8-4. We're going to make the college football, and we're going to shock the world, and we're going to pull off maybe an upset.
Mark, there's something about that Hayden Fry tree that is very loyal to programs. It's not just Iowa. Think about this. With the exception being kind of Brett Bielema, although Brett's not hopped around, right? It's not been like Brett's just taking great jobs. He left Wisconsin to take the Arkansas job. That's basically it. Is that fair? And it didn't really work out at Arkansas, although you've defended him there. But like everybody under Hayden Fry has been super loyal. Think about Bill Snyder at Kansas State. Think about Mark Stoops at Kentucky. I mean, Mike Stoops has hopped around. He's not a very good coach. Bo Pelini got fired, but he was going to, he wasn't going anywhere other than Nebraska. And yes, Bo Pelini was on the Iowa staff briefly. Don Patterson, very loyal, had opportunities to go other places, ended up being the all-time winningest coach at an FCS program. And Kirk Ferentz, of course. And Dan McCarney didn't hop around. He was at Iowa State for how long, Mark?
What, about 7 years?
Yeah.
8 years?
Which I know a different era, but 8 years is a long time in today's day and age of college football.
No, that's a great point. I get it. I get it.
And Hayden Fry. Hayden Fry's the ultimate. USC wanted Hayden Fry at one point, and he stuck it out with Iowa. And so there's something in that Iowa water, I guess, that Hayden Fry was given to his assistants throughout his tenure there. Mark, that's really all I had to say. I logged in and I saw, I mentioned this in the chat. It seems like every time I turn your show on, I see a big orange circle with a D on it. So I know Daryl's on here, and he just, he must just really love your show, because I never hear anything from him on my show anymore. So I'm assuming that's just because he is so locked into your channel that he just doesn't have time for those minuscule sub 10,000 subscriber channels.
Is there a reason not to love our show?
No, actually, I want to compliment you. If you want to get rid of your banner for a second, let me compliment you for a second. The banner on the screen, your bottom ticker and your main banner. You've done a very nice job promoting social media. Why is it? You've still got there. Why is his thing show? It's going over it. Okay.
Okay. What do we want here?
Yeah. See, that's great. See, I like that. Right. So I love what you've done with social media there at the bottom. You've got, I'm sure you've announced it on the air, but you've promoted somebody as your operations manager, correct?
Absolutely. We have our guy, TJ.
We're seeing the effects of that. And have you told TJ that he looks a lot like Pat McMurphy from, is it McMurphy? Is that what it is?
It's Pat Murphy.
Murphy.
Yes, Pat Murphy. He's not Brett McMurphy. He's
Yeah,
Pat Murphy.
I'm mixing the two together. So
okay. So no, I don't believe we have stated that. Did you state that on? You said that on air. So you've got that out there, Corey. You've taken.
No, I think I said it. I think I said it pre-recording. Darryl, you know who we're talking about here? Do you know Mark's Ohio State guy from 247, Pat Murphy?
He's the guy on the Ohio State channel, right?
I don't know how much you have him on the Ohio State channel, Mark, but
yeah, he's not on the regular show, but I bring him on.
You need to put. Can we just?
he's my version of Elliot Clough.
All right. I'm gonna at some point grab a shot, like a screenshot of both those guys, and put them side by side and let you see it, because it's uncanny, man. It's uncanny, and it's ironic that one works on the team up north side and the other is on Ohio State side. I just think that's hilarious.
Nobody knows what you're talking about at this point.
It's okay.
Corey, you even lost me, and I'm pretty involved in this community,
yes.
as you said.
So, you know what you brought to light, Corey, is that my personal X account is incorrect, the handle. So I've got to get that corrected.
It is?
Yes, it is.
What's incorrect about it?
I have changed that to Mark Rogers VOCFB.
Oh, well, won't it still go to that or no?
I think so.
Okay. This is the one it used to be. So yeah, change it. There you go. See, I'm always offering help.
Yeah, that's very helpful of you, Corey.
All right.
So everybody can catch Corey and Coach Don Patterson after the ball game on From the Hawkeye of the Storm. And what else is available over there?
Well, I told Erica in the chat, Iowa got a quarterback commitment today out of another quarterback from La Jolla, Cash Herrera. Interesting land. So I'll be releasing something there, and also be releasing a short here very soon regarding my score prediction. I tweeted this out earlier today. Joe Klatt. Did you see his prediction for the game Saturday, Mark?
Thanks to you, I did. I do not follow Joel Klatt. I do not believe. I follow you, of course.
Well, he didn't even post
your repost.
I had to, our guy Kyle over on my channel actually tipped me off to it. I had to go look up. I don't normally do this. I don't really watch any other college football content, but I did go on Joel Klatt's podcast and I listened to his segment on Iowa, Ohio State. He really thinks Ohio State's not going to have any problems. He thinks Ohio State's offense is going to explode. He thinks Iowa's way too one-dimensional offensively. And you could be right. I'm certainly not going to tell him he's wrong. I think there's a chance it doesn't go that way, but I won't be shocked. I mean, they are one-dimensional, Iowa is, and they got to prove otherwise.
Corey, I don't watch anybody else's college football content except yours as well.
Well, great. You set a record the other night for being on my show for 3 minutes. It was not only was it a new personal record, it trumped your previous record by 2 minutes and 45 seconds. So, anyways,
well, that's a bit of a stretch, but not much, so I won't.
Hey, Mark, before Corey leaves, can you read Adam's super chat he had? Yeah. It was addressed indirectly to Corey, and I think he would want to know about it.
Oh, great. Yep. Oh, that's a shame. Yeah, I've been following. I haven't followed it here in the last week. During the bye week, I kind of checked out from football as a whole. But man, it's amazing. I got to produce some content on that drill. I don't know if people would watch, but Mark knows what I'm talking about. The storyline of quarterbacks that have left Iowa to find greener pastures, like Deacon Hill at Utah Tech, who's now QB2, Carson May at Abilene Christian, who hasn't played a snap, Deuce Hogan at New Mexico, who is sharing snaps and now has a broken collarbone. Spencer Petras, who I believe is still the starter at Utah State, but got hurt again. Is finally back. He might be the best success story. Joe Labus had a nice game 1 this year for Central Michigan, and they threw 5 picks the next week. So there's it's amazing. Or we could go Alex Padilla, who never played when he went over to SMU. What are you discoing? You got a disco ball in there, Mark?
That's maybe what I need to draw viewers. This really bothers me. That's supposed to be blue.
Yeah.
It's not blue. It's purple. It looks purple, but the lights are blue.
Well, that's the thing now. You got to have some blue light in your background.
Well, that's what that is blue, but
Yeah,
it doesn't show up as blue.
I
Shows
think it
up
looks
as purple.
Well, I think
No,
it looks.
I think it's a big blue, Mark. I don't think it's just blue. I think it's big blue.
Okay. Of course, that's all you see is big blue.
Yeah. Hey.
All right.
All
Corey,
right.
appreciate you being here.
And head out. Thanks, Mark.
Mark, I see Michigan man wants to talk to me as well. If
Yeah.
you want to bring,
We will accommodate this for, and I'm serious, 1 minute. 1 minute, because we don't do this.
yeah, I
So
know.
we will do this right here.
Well, he seems pretty adamant.
He is pretty adamant. So here we go. Michigan man, I'm putting the clock on it. Here we go. 1 minute.
Hey, I'm gonna be real. I'm gonna be real quick, but I gotta put the real on the witness stand real quick. The real, your original whole theory about playoffs was it only pertained to the playoffs when it came to the 1%. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Michigan didn't have Connor Stallions prior going into the playoff. Well, before the playoff, they weren't allowed to have analysts on the field. So if there was any cheating, it wouldn't have happened in the playoffs. So your 1% theory, even if the cheating comes out and it's they're convicted or whatever, it still would not vindicate you from your talent theory when it comes to the playoffs. You do realize that, correct?
Oh, I realize that. I realize that talent is not nearly as important as I gave it the credit to. I also realize Michigan's more likely to be in trouble today than yesterday because Antonio Pierce got hit with an 8-year show cause for significantly less stuff than what Michigan did.
Yeah, that's fine. That's a separate discussion. I just needed you to say that, hey, my 1% theory was wrong. And that's what I got.
Michigan
Okay,
beat Alabama and Michigan beat Washington. I was wrong about that. Michigan.
Perfect. That's all I needed, man. That's all I needed. And last thing before I go, Kentucky ain't. I was gonna say Kentucky ain't making no playoff 8-4. That's crazy.
Well, Darrell laid out a scenario in which made it feasible, not likely or anything like that, but he laid out a scenario in which it made it feasible in losing very close games to, I think it would be Tennessee and Texas.
Okay, yeah, I just can't see it, man. 4 losses. I don't know. I don't blame him. That's his team, right? You gonna be a little irrational when it comes to your team. We all are, except for you, Mark. Mark, you keep it pretty unbiased. I'll give you credit for that.
I'll do my best.
But real quick, man, I'll just talk about my team real quick, man. We got a fourth quarter issue. I wasn't able to hop on. I tried to hop on last week, but had some things happen. We got a fourth quarter issue, I think, a problem with adjusting. And, I brought this up to my friend. Last year we had quite a few games where the offense didn't do anything for 2.5 quarters. Iowa, Washington, championship game, Bowling Green, Penn State even. And the difference was we had a generational defense. That even when the offense isn't doing nothing for multiple quarters, the defense still didn't allow the other team to score. And, we don't have that this year. So if the defense gets tired or if, they figure something out in terms of adjustments, the defense, I don't think is going to be able to hold up in one of these games. I want to get your thoughts on that.
Fourth quarter issue. Well, the Arkansas State fourth quarter issue was more about Davis Warren, for the most part, just throwing the ball to the other team from what I remember. The fourth quarter issue against USC, okay. And a fourth quarter issue against Minnesota.
Well, Arkansas State also scored, 2 touchdowns in that fourth quarter?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah, okay. So, yeah, I think they have a problem, and it could be a young coach thing, which really isn't an excuse for a guy like Wink. But they definitely have a problem with when the other team adjusts at halftime, the second half, they don't adjust back, and that's an issue.
So here's my thought there. So you got Wink Martindale running this defense, and he's very accomplished at what he does. I know that there have been other examples of NFL defensive coordinators coming to college football, especially in his situation. He hasn't coached in college football since the early 2000s. and their scheme is typically a little too complex for college players to grasp. So maybe they're just catching on to this defense. The other thing that PJ Fleck talked about after the game was them determining part of this was a forced situation because of time and score, that they had to pick up the tempo, but they determined that in picking up the tempo that they could get the play call in and run the play before Wink could make his adjustments on the other side. And you could just tell, even though PJ Fleck went on and on about what a great defensive coordinator Wink Martindale is that they discovered something there. Now, what's interesting is that Jed Fish, as an offensive coach, and Will Rogers as a quarterback are much better than what Minnesota has. And I got to think that they would have picked up something from what Minnesota succeeded at, throwing the ball in the fourth quarter with tempo.
Yeah, I agree. There are some schematic issues I disagree with that we weren't doing the past 3 years, such as, I don't know why he does this, but when the team gets into the red zone, he loves to go cover zero. And I don't know if that's just an NFL thing, but for example, on that last touchdown drive by Minnesota in the red zone, he ran 2 cover zero plays. If a team needs to score quick, right, to potentially get an onside kick, why are you doing cover zero? Wouldn't you want to, and I think Joe Klatt was even saying this, wouldn't you want to run zone and put a bunch of people in coverage so that they don't score quick? So he makes some questionable schematic decisions I just don't agree with. And he also didn't really adjust. They kept hitting the same pass play over and over again. I don't know if I think it was a seam route on the left side of the field over and over. So I think there's some schematic issues too that they've got to figure out. I think they've gotten a little bit better, but yeah, there's some issues there. And really the main thing with Michigan, and the main thing is the offense in the second half, if they could just move the ball more than they are in the second half, a lot of these games look better, right? They don't look close. USC, Arkansas State, and this past game with Minnesota, they're all blowouts if they can figure out how to adjust in the second half and just get a couple first downs on these drives. They're all blowouts. So,
well, I would agree with that on the Arkansas State and Minnesota games. The USC game was not going to be a blowout just because they made 2 big runs in the first half to make it 14-0. The Minnesota and Arkansas State games, especially, let's put Arkansas State in a different category because they were never really threatened in that game. Minnesota did legitimately threaten them. But even though Michigan had game control and was the far better team, dominated at the line of scrimmage, put pressure on Brosmer, didn't allow Darius Taylor to run for anything, shut down the run game completely, that it was about the final 8 to 9 minutes of the game getting out of hand and them getting into a precarious situation. But USC was the better team during the second, third, and most of the fourth quarter.
Yeah, they definitely play better. My thing with the USC game, I put a lot of that on coaching. And we brought this up last time, is they've been using putting Edwards in there as much as they did in the third quarter. When we agree he stalls drives, in my opinion, this is what he does. They should have just went heavy-handed with Mullings, and also Alex Orji was his first start. You didn't have Colson Loveland. I don't even know if Alex Orji is going to be that good going forward, but. They were shorthanded there and they misused players. I think if they would have stuck with Mullings and had Colson Loveland, I know it's a what-if game, I think they probably win that game by multiple scores. That's just me. I think this week against Washington, we have to see more improvement in the pass game to have any success for the rest of the year. I do like some of the things I saw from Alex Orji. I don't know if he's going to improve that much more. But we'll see. I like how they use Edwards. Do you like how they used Edwards in that last game? They try to put him, obviously, in more passing situations. They use him in motion a lot more. Do you think that they should continue with that? Do you think that's a good foundation that they started with and they should probably continue to build on it?
Yes, because I go back to the beginning of his career when that backfield was full with Hassan Haskins carrying the ball 25 times and Blake Corum was the changeup and they were fine at running back. they were looking for ways to get Donovan Edwards on the field. And what did they do? I can remember a game in particular against Maryland where he caught 10 passes for $150 because they were lining him up in the slot. He was in the backfield, but they were throwing him the ball out of the backfield. He was all over the place, and he was extremely effective. Yep.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's something they could build on. If they continue with this type of offense, because in my opinion, they have one of the hardest run games to stop with Alex Orji back there. And Mullings, and if they could use motion with Edwards, I think it's going to make it hard for defenses to key in on the run, on specific players in the run game. And if again, it all comes down to, can Alex Orji approve enough to make to give some balance to the offense? And if he can show that this week, I'm gonna be very optimistic about the rest of the season. So I'll end it on that.
Very cool. Thanks, Michigan man. Appreciate it. Let's keep it rolling here at the Voice of College Football. We got 3 more calls. Let's take those and give these guys sufficient time. So I'm not going to rush through them, but at the same time, we are done with the calls. So thank you for being here. Leave your comments and questions there in the chat. We will get to them if you leave us a super chat contribution. All right. We got Minnesota Dave checking in.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm doing well. What's going on with you tonight?
Just watching the UTEP in what school is that? Oh, yeah, Sam Houston State game. And I watched end of the Milwaukee Classic. The end of the game was great, of the Milwaukee Brewers and New York Mets, with the Mets coming back to win.
Good to know. All right.
But my question for you is, what do you think of this whole entire Mid-American Conference maybe losing Northern Illinois and Toledo going to the Mount West just for football?
It's survival of the fittest. So once the SEC and the Big Ten decided we're going to become conglomerations, and of course the Big 12 is just as big as those conferences as well with 16 teams. So it's not just those two. And now the ACC with 17, although the ACC was in no way looking to expand. They just were sitting there ready to take on teams once the Pac-12 imploded, or so we thought. The previous Pac-12 imploded, of course. So I think this is just a ramification. It's just a result of these mega conferences. So when you look at those 4 conferences going from, let's do the quick math, going from 12, 12, 24, 24, 14, 38, going from 52 teams to 34, 50, 67. They've added 15 schools. They have scooped up an entire conference plus by themselves. Then the only way the other conferences survive is to backfill. And this has been going on the last several years. If you've noticed, the American Conference has been plucked out by the Big 12 in particular. And so then the American Conference has gone down into Conference USA and down into the Sun Belt, taken from those teams. And what have those teams done? They've grabbed FCS teams and pulled them up from the minor leagues, and on and on and on. So that's what's going to happen. And now the Mountain West has to backfill for their football programs. And I hope the Mid-American Conference teams that you just mentioned do not do that, because I just think that there's
the only one I really think that would really think about it is Northern Illinois, because they're kind of like the odd man out.
Sure, and they're
there's no
less
Illinois,
tenured member of the MAC.
Illinois schools in that conference.
Yeah,
they should they should put in Illinois State or Western Illinois or Eastern Illinois just to create at least a rivalry for them.
Well, of course, we understand that money's the first consideration, but I just hate to have schools divided by sport in different conferences, that there's not a unified, okay, when Toledo then plays all the Michigan directional schools and men's and women's basketball and baseball and all these other sports, that they don't play in football, that we're a completely different football school. It's just then you talk about it being a complete money grab. We can make X number of dollars more by basically whoring out our football team to another conference and turning our back on our home conference just for football, just to make a few extra dollars.
Yeah, and from what I heard, the president of the Mid-American Conference basically said that if you guys were taking your football team out, you might as well take you might as well just take all the other sports out, and we're not going to be just your little I don't know how to say it correctly, but we're not going to be your pansies for your other sports.
For sure.
You keep the football or you just take everything.
That's the way it should be. But Notre Dame has led the way on that.
Yeah. That's and you also have Hawaii, but Hawaii in basketball, the conference that they're in all those teams don't have football programs. At least I don't think they do, or at least if they do, then they're like 1AA.
Hawaii doesn't play in the Mountain West Conference?
No, they don't. Only for football.
Okay. All right, Minnesota Dave, anything else?
Oh, well, that's pretty much it.
All right, man. Appreciate it. Enjoy the game on Saturday.
I will. Go Gophers.
We will keep it rolling. We got our buddy Adam jumping on board. Adam, how's it going? Hello, Adam.
Hey, Mark, how are you? Can you hear me?
I'm doing just fine. I don't know why you won't pop on the screen anyway. It's not popping up there for some reason. Yeah, I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. They're not missing anything. So I'll be brief. I just wanted to discuss Rutgers. So Greg Schiano, when Greg Schiano first coached Rutgers, it was from 2001 to 2011. And when he came on in 2001, he went 2-9 in his first year. He went 1-11 in his second year, 5-7 in his third year, 4-7 in his fourth year. But then in his fifth year, turned it around, went 7-5. And then in the next four seasons, 11-2, 8-5, 8-5, and 9-4 respectively. So then we had the Chris Ash era, which was a disaster, so I don't need to go through that. But now we have Schiano Part 2.
Yep.
2020, he's 3-6. 21, he's 5-8. 22, he's 1-8. 23, he's 3-6. And then once again in the fifth year, he's 4-0. Just like the fifth year from the 2001 era, when he turned it around and went 7-5, he's now turned it around again. And I think the future for Rutgers is going to be very bright, and we don't talk about them enough because this goes back to 2023 when they beat Miami by 7 in the Pinstripe Bowl, only lost to Ohio State by 15, and only lost to Wisconsin by 11. And, this year we're seeing them beat Wisconsin, beat Washington and Virginia Tech and have the number 21 ranked recruiting class. So when I think about Rutgers, I think about them relative to the Big Ten. And the Big Ten isn't as strong, I think, as people think. Michigan's got a great defense, but they have a quarterback problem. Orji is not good. He was 7 of 12 in his first game for, I believe it was 32 yards, 86 yards in his second game, 3.3 yards per rush. Ineffective. Now, as far as Ohio State goes, I have a lot of respect for Ohio State, but they were only up by 14 on Marshall in the first half, at the end of the first half. And Michigan State was moving the ball, except for those hapless turnovers. Ohio State looked vulnerable. And when you look at Oregon struggling against Boise State, my question for you is, why aren't we talking about Rutgers given the trajectory of the program under Schiano and what they've done at the end of 2003 and what they're doing so far in 2024? I think they can be contenders.
So Ohio State was 28-14 at half against Marshall.
Right.
So to put this conversation into context, I got to start with when you say we're not talking about Rutgers, and I know you're not targeting me, you're just talking about College Football Nation is not talking about Rutgers. Like, what are you leading us into the possibilities of Rutgers football being this year? Do you think that this is a legitimate Big Ten championship contender?
I think it's possible. I think it's unlikely, but it's possible. And I think that next year and the year after that, they will contend for the Big Ten championship because they've got a good recruiting class coming in, two 4-star wideouts so far, number 21 in the country. And like I said, at the end of 2023, they beat Miami. This year, they beat Washington, and they beat Virginia Tech on the road. And it's also the 5th year of Schiano's second tenure. And what we've seen from the past is in his 5th year going forward, he turns it around. And it's the exact same trajectory. And I think he's an old school coach. I think they have a great defense. And if they get a quarterback, Rutgers is going to contend for the Big Ten championship, particularly given the weaknesses that we see among the traditionally top teams. And I don't think enough is being spoken about Rutgers. So I'm going to make a prediction that Rutgers, within the next 3 years, will be in the Big Ten championship game. And the more we talk about them, the better it is, because I think some of the blue bloods are going to have some problems.
Well, I will say that Greg Schiano is an excellent coach. I have praised him on many occasions. However, I would say that his first stint at Rutgers concerning conference affiliation and competition schedule was a much easier lift than this one. So you could compete for a Big East championship being the 25th or 30th best team in the country. You can't do that in the Big Ten. He's going to have a top 10 team in the country to seriously contend for a Big Ten championship. So that's first of all.
Right.
Secondly, the Virginia Tech and Washington wins were good for Rutgers development, for their progression on this path of respectability. But for a true contending team in the Big Ten, those are lackluster, if not awful efforts. If Ohio State went to Virginia Tech and won by a field goal and then beat Washington at home by a field goal, people would be jumping off bridges in Columbus.
That's true. But you know what I look at, too? I look at Rutgers' losses last year. They lost by 15 against Ohio State. They lost by 11 against a much better Wisconsin team last year. And for those people in the chat who think I'm trolling, well, who thought TCU would be among the top 4 a few years ago? Who thought Appalachian State would have beaten Michigan? You know, I think the trajectory for Rutgers under Schiano is going to be very strong, and I think it's going to change the Big Ten. And maybe I'm wrong about that, but I think people need to pay a lot more attention to Rutgers.
Well, it's an interesting theory, and I think there's some validity to it. And even if it doesn't come true, doesn't mean it's not a valid suggestion. It's not a valid projection. Not all valid projections come true. So it's worth talking about and exploring for sure.
Well, we'll see if I'm right. Thanks for taking my call, Mark. I appreciate it. Great show.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate
All
it.
right. Take care.
And as we see on the banner right there, we got Rutgers +7 against Nebraska. The over-under is 40.5. That game, I believe, is on FS1 at 4 p.m. Eastern time. And again, Rutgers could move their record to 5-0, and Nebraska looking to avoid going to 0-2 in the Big Ten. Rutgers would, of course, go to 2-0 in the Big Ten. And our buddy David Greenshield is
hello,
honoring us tonight.
Yes, indeed. By the way, a really good recruiting base up there in New Jersey. Some really good high school football talent up there for Mr. Schiano and his staff to mine from. I know that as an Ohio State fan, they've gone up there and gotten a fair amount of talent within the New Jersey area over the years. So, but you're right, Mark. The Big East circa early 2000s, and whatever you think about the Big Ten right now, bit of a difference there, bit of a gap there. I must say. But, you know, hey, I could see Rutgers at least being maybe an 8-4 program, maybe 9-3 program, which, you know, for Rutgers, 8-4, 9-3, you know, that's something to be very proud of. That's something to be very proud of.
They've got a trip to USC. They've got a trip to Nebraska. Of course, that's on Saturday.
Right.
They have no losses right now. Let's say they steal one of those two and probably trip up somewhere else or lose those two and go unscathed elsewhere. They do have Illinois as one of their tougher games left. They could go 9-3, 10-2 this year.
They could. They could. I love Monangai. By the way, Monangai, probably what? One of the top 3-4 running backs in the Big Ten?
Well, two of the top 2 running backs in the Big Ten play in Columbus. So those are the two.
There you go.
I was telling Corey Brad, our buddy, the other day, let's not confuse yardage totals with talent and with NFL ability. The 2 best running backs in the Big Ten are at Ohio State.
I tend to agree with you, but everybody's going to call me. Well, everybody will call you a homer if you say that, right, Mark? No, I think that is true. I actually do think the 2 best running backs are.
It's like, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, but I think I ranked Ohio State's 4 wide receivers as 4 of the top 6 wide receivers in the conference.
Junkins was the best running back in the SEC last year. I mean, so what is that? I mean, seriously? And as much as Big Ten fans can hate on the SEC all you want, they've got some pretty good talent there. Let's be fair about it. So it's not like they've got bad football players down there. I will say this though, but Monangai is really good, and I do think Caleb Johnson is very good.
Sure,
and you've got to give Caleb Johnson a lot of credit because he's not playing on as loaded an offense as Junkins and Henderson is playing on. So because he's pretty much the mark on that offense. By the way, before I get to Ohio State and Iowa, I listened to Zach and some other folks talk about college football on Friday night. Do you think do you kind of bemoan it a little bit from the standpoint? Well, obviously you're a college football show, you can't hate on it too much, but they seem to think that it takes away from high school football on Friday. And as a person that once covered high school football, Mark Rogers, I was wondering if you had some thoughts on that.
I even forget high school football exists at this point.
Yeah, okay.
So, yeah, I understand what you're saying. We all went to high school. Therefore, there is a memory back to our high school days and going to high school football games on Friday nights. And then
go Bulldogs, right, Mark? Come on.
Bulldogs.
There you go.
The Metro Conference.
That's
absolutely.
Right. Black Tigers, baby.
Yes, it was quite the era for, I went to high school with a future NBA player and a future NFL player.
Okay.
So we had some talent there at Stowe High School.
You did, yeah. Larry Zonka, one of the legends to come out of Stowe.
He predated me a little bit, but we had Lee Gissendaner, who went on to become the Special Teams Player of the Year in the Big Ten at Northwestern, and then played for the Houston Oilers. He was a sophomore when I was a senior, and then Dave Jamerson was a first-round NBA pick of the Houston Rockets.
Right.
And he was 2 years in front of me.
Great player at OU.
OU led the nation in scoring.
Right.
So that's my little plug for Stowe High School. But I understand. I can't be selective in my tradition-rich platform where I state, okay, tradition means something, being a purist, holding fast to some of these tenets in sports, and then, turn my back on high school football. So I understand what they're saying, and I don't bemoan it in any way. I'm just saying it doesn't affect me. Okay. I don't care. I just figure that if you like high school football, then you're going to go watch high school football on Saturday or Friday night. And then I'm guessing these cable systems and the streaming, forget cable TV, the streaming devices allow you to watch high school football from many of these locations on Friday night. What I like about Friday night college football is that it takes 2 games typically, like tomorrow night with a TCU Houston, UNLV Syracuse, and Michigan State Oregon. We're talking about 3 games that I'm probably not going to watch on Saturday because there are better games, but now I'm going to watch them on a Friday, and I get to see more teams participate over the course of the weekend in college football.
Yeah, I will say this. I looked at the slate this week. Not a great slate of college football this week. I don't know. I don't know if we're seeing. Well, it's going to get better, folks, here in October and into November, folks. But this is not one of the better weeks this week. I did want to talk about the Buckeyes in Iowa. By the way, Mark, some of these games bring back some memories. I know you wax nostalgic from time to time, Mark. One of the first games I remember was the rain in Columbus in 1985. And those linebackers, Kumaro, Pepper Johnson, Chris Spielman taking down Chuck Long and Ronnie Harmon in the rain. Mark, is that one of your fondest memories of Ohio State, Iowa?
Yeah, absolutely it was. I actually remember, yes, a great CBS broadcast from Brent Musburger and Eric Parsegan. And yes, Iowa 1 point, or the number one team in the country. I don't know what the point spread of the game was.
Yeah.
But also remember that I had to make a phone call and kind of, talk my way around postponing a date, making sure.
Wow, look at you, Mark.
I had to pick up the date late.
Wow.
I can't miss the Buckeyes. So
the folks let you borrow the station wagon that night, Mark, or
went
was
on
it
went on a little late?
Mm-hmm.
So I mistimed the pickup on the date, but no, I couldn't. The only other time I know I'd done that other times. I was really bad about trying to balance a significant other with my sporting interests was very difficult back in those days. I remember doing stuff like pretending that I got sick, and then I go home and watch because I wanted to go home and watch the ALCS or whatever, that kind of stuff. But and also the end all be all was one time, and this is pre-internet when you can watch whatever you want at whatever time. Man, I'm walking out the door for a date and I turn on the TV and my boy Elvis is on. Well, come on.
Well, so there you go.
I had to delay that for about an hour.
For the King? I mean, come on. Yeah.
So anyway, I digress. Yes, 1985 in the rain on the artificial turf, of course, which caused for a much different, sensation of what happened in football games when it was more of a slick surface and guys would, slide for 20 yards down the field on these plays. That was a good one. Unfortunately, the next trip to Columbus was a very bad one with the Marv Cook 4th and 26, 29, whatever the number was for that Ohio State team that just kept losing 13-10 practically every week to Earl Bruce's demise. 91 was the last time that Iowa won in Columbus. That was a rock fight, 16-9. Kent Graham, we can't score. We have no explosive plays.
Do you remember the year before in 90 when Iowa was, I believe, ranked preseason? Bobby Olive from Greg Fry. I think Iowa was 2 or 3 in the country. Were they 1 at the time?
Well, I was going to say 1 second on the clock.
Yeah, okay, right.
I have a story for that game, too.
Okay.
I had to work a high school doubleheader as an intern at WAKC in Akron.
Okay. And, my man, Phil Ferguson.
Yes, Phil Ferguson.
Yep, that's right.
And I had my girlfriend at the time. I said, I had this, laid out to where, I had the perfect instructions of I knew how long, remember when you'd have to put the VCR on a certain speed, recording speed. So I knew exactly what recording speed it would have to be on to get the entire game on.
You're losing the under 30 crowd right now when you mentioned VCR, Mark.
Yeah. So anyway, long story short, my girlfriend, I had her record the Ohio State Iowa game, and I got home and she didn't put it on the right speed, and it cut out with about a minute left in the game, and I threw a fit.
Wow. Yeah, you lost a lot of people at VCR, Mark. That was there's the issue there. You lost a lot of people at VCR.
That was the 1990 game, though. Yes.
There you go. Well, let's talk about this game a little bit. I didn't get a chance to listen to you, Corey and Pat Murphy speak about the game, but I actually, like I told you, I think this is a great test for Ohio State because I think this is going to measure the two things that we hope are most improved as Buckeye fans, which was from a year ago, the offensive line and, of course, quarterback play. And I think we're going to see how good particularly I'm interested to see, how good this offensive line controls the line of scrimmage against an Iowa team that I think will probably try to sell out to stop Ohio State's running game, not unlike what Sparty tried to do last week. And then I'm also couple that with Will Howard. How good of decisions does he make? And I know people still question it. I still want to see him take a deep shot, challenge down the field at least a couple times. Once they cross midfield, play action, try a couple throws. And I don't know if you guys got into this on the show, but I mean, what are just your thoughts on that Chip Kelly, Phil Parker chess match that could go on in this game, Mark?
So the first thing that comes to mind is that Ryan Day has had this sole responsibility of orchestrating this offense for the entire time that he's been the head coach. And now there's a reason that Chip Kelly has been hired. Chip Kelly has been hired and paid a ton of money to not lift an Ohio State offense that routinely is top 5 in the nation in yards and points. It's for these kind of matchups. You have to be the difference, Chip Kelly. You get to focus solely on this Iowa defense, and probably did so in the offseason,
right?
While Ryan Day gets to be a head coach and no longer has to divert his attention. Therefore, Chip Kelly, let's see what you were able to cook up to fool Phil Parker's defense, because that's what you're being paid to do, not score 85 points against whomever else is on the schedule. So that's point number one for me. In terms of taking deep shots, I'm all for taking deep shots when you have the kind of athletes on the perimeter that Ohio State has, even when you don't have a classic long ball thrower at quarterback, because you allow your athletes to make plays downfield. So yes, absolutely. We don't want to be playing pitch and catch from 8 yards constantly. And this Iowa defense, it's difficult to matriculate the ball down the field, as Hank Stram would say.
Mm-hmm.
And also they're extremely savvy at being ball hawks. And when you become predictable, then you get the kind of plays that Will Johnson has turned in a couple times this year and taking balls back because he reads the same thing over and over and over and over. And then those Iowa defensive backs are similar, especially on one side of the field, with that kind of talent and film study to be ready to do something like that and jump on those short throws.
Yeah, the one thing I was going to say, that's why I said once they cross midfield, Mark, because maybe you use a double move by Jeremiah Smith. Maybe after you've run the ball for a first down or two, you cross midfield, you try the double move. Obviously, if it's intercepted in the end zone, what's that as good as, Mark? It's just as good as a what?
It's a punt.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, I'm not saying you want to waste a possession, but nevertheless, it's not like you're worried about you throwing a pick, on the out and it, going the other way, pick six. So,
if the Ohio State's defense backed up Ohio State or Iowa's offense inside its own 5 or 10 yard line, after throwing a pick,
right.
I'll take that scenario. I'll take that situation.
By the way, is the consensus that this Iowa defense is as good as it's been the last 2 years?
They're not playing like it. No, that Iowa defense over the last 5 years would not have given up the second half yardage and points and explosive plays against Iowa State that it did. Now against Minnesota, they basically gave up 2 drives and were lights out after that. But who's going crazy over Minnesota's offense? So,
I will. Oh, go ahead.
I think the sample size is too small, but to answer you at this point, no.
Yeah, because that defense they had 2 years ago with Campbell at linebacker, which was really good. I mean, Ohio State had 50 points, but we both know if you watch that game, which I did, that score was very misleading. I mean, Iowa did a really good job defensively in that game, and Ohio State got a lot of their points off of turnovers. In fact, I think they may have had a defensive touchdown or 2 in that game.
Yeah, I actually went to the box score on that game during the Buckeye show this week just to give people an indicator on what that looked like. And if you went through the drive chart for Ohio State, was not impressive.
Yeah, I think they got 5 or 6 turnovers, something crazy in that
6.
game.
Yeah.
6 turnovers in that game. It was. I know it was 5 or 6. I thought. I will say, from an Ohio State defense versus an Iowa offense perspective, I mentioned Caleb Johnson earlier. Uh, could you see him being like a future starting NFL running back? Because from what I've seen, I think he can be. Or is he more like a guy that's like a backup, maybe change of pace back, or just makes a roster type back?
Okay, our buddy Corey Bratta would be so much better at analyzing Caleb Johnson's ability, but I'll say it this way: these are my impressions. I'm not saying if I get this wrong, Iowa fans, and you really know what you're talking about, then I might have missed it on this. But these are my impressions. That number one, he's not quick twitch enough
Okay.
to be a big time running back or even a starting running back in the NFL. It takes him a while to get he's a beautiful athlete to watch. Long strider, he's like a poor man's Eric Dickerson. Give him a well blocked play and he's going to hit the seam and he's going to be difficult. Then he gets those thighs churning and he's difficult to bring down. Nobody in the secondary wants to deal with him, kind of thing. But as we know, in the NFL, man, you need on probably a quarter of those plays, those backs are having to sidestep somebody behind the line of scrimmage just to get going. Like, they got to be quick. And I don't see quickness out of him. And also, for him to be a changeup kind of player, I don't see that. He's like a featured kind of guy. I don't see him being like a third down back in the NFL. I don't think he's a receiver.
Right.
So again, that's just my impression. I'm not selling that as the end all be all scouting report on Caleb Johnson.
The numbers have been impressive. I haven't watched much of Iowa. I caught a little bit of the Iowa State game earlier in the year, a game in which Iowa, is the consensus that they blew the game, Mark? I mean, because I thought they did.
Yes, they did. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I took away watching, parts of that game, because I thought they were very much in control. By the way, Johnson's numbers, looking at the game log, very impressive. I mean, it was like 170, 180, and then he ramped up to an over 200-yard game. So he's been really, really good. But, can he do it against a really good defense? And this is going to be a defense that's definitely going to be stacked against to stop him. Because Cade McNamara in the passing game, I will say this, though, and a lot of Ohio State fans have been talking about this week. The one player on that Iowa offense, what is the one player on that Iowa offense that Ohio State would like to have on their team right now? There's one player.
Their best offensive lineman.
No. Luke Lachey, their tight end.
I guess.
I mean,
really? Do they need him?
Well, the one position Ohio State's had a little bit of struggle, a little inconsistency at this year has been tight end.
I'll take their best offensive lineman, whoever that is, wherever he plays. He can move somewhere, or we can move somebody else out of the way. Absolutely. I'm taking the best offensive lineman they have.
Well, I mean, G. Scott has been a little up and down, and their other tight end that they got, the transfer that came in, hasn't been the best. Lachey's a good player, by the way, Mark. A little bit surprised.
He's a good player, but he's not needed.
Well, okay. Very good blocker, too, by the way, which is really important for Ohio State. Yeah, if you could tell me we can upgrade Josh Fryer maybe at tackle, but as I told you, I like pretty much all of Ohio State's offensive line. He's the only one that I find a little bit questionable as Fryers. If he has to go against, let's say, a speed rusher that could give him some real problems.
This is the Ohio State offense 2 years ago in Columbus against Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
4 plays, 1 yard field goal. So obviously they were given a gift because they had a 1 yard drive for a field goal. And then they had a fumble return for a touchdown by their defense, obviously.
Right.
So then they went 10 plays, 75 yards. No. I'm sorry. That's Ohio State giving it up on a CJ Stroud fumble, sack, strip, touchdown, Iowa.
I think that was Campbell that scored that touchdown, if I'm not mistaken, maybe.
Yeah, I don't think it was. But anyway,
I
think it was Joe Evans. But anyway, I may be wrong. Buckeyes, 10 plays, 75 yards, a touchdown. Very good. Then 4 plays, 4 yards, field goal. Obviously, they were given another gift off a fumble. 5 plays, 17 yards, field goal. 5 plays, 12 yards, punt, 8 plays, 24 yards, field goal, 1 play, -2, half. They probably just nailed it down. First play of the second half, pick, 3 plays, 5 yards, punt, 4 plays, a 15-yard drive for a touchdown. Another
Right.
gift. 4 plays, 55 yards, second legitimate drive for a touchdown. Then you had your third 3 plays, 90 yards. I think
Fleming
I
caught a
think
deep pass.
Marvin Harrison Jr. had a long one. Yeah, I can picture it. Then they started to loosen them up. 8 plays, 40 yards, and of course, at this point, the game's over.
Right.
So yeah, they did not tear it up on offense.
Yeah, Stroud started to hit some throws maybe into the second half, but that was probably after Iowa's defense had been on the field for like forever. By the way, it was interesting that year. One of the Ohio State beat reporters that year had a Brian Ferentz Survivor show. Because remember how he was statistically, what was it Iowa had to rank in certain areas statistically that year for him to keep his job?
They had to score 25 points a game.
Yeah, okay. Where is Brian at? Where have we spotted Brian at? Where's he at now?
He's a offensive analyst at Maryland.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Thus, their 0-2 record in the Big Ten.
Mike Loxley put his hand on that stove, huh? Really looking to upgrade that Maryland offensive staff, Mike Loxley.
Like this is who you're looking for to add as an analyst on your team. I don't.
Yeah. Yep. My overall feeling on this game, just bottom line, my early vibe is between 28-10, 31-10. I think it could be semi-competitive for about a half, maybe into the third quarter, and then Ohio State kind of turns on the Jets. I'm trying to give some respect to the Iowa defense, I guess, Mark, that they could keep Ohio State in the high 20s to low 30s.
Yeah, I'm having big issues with this 18-point spread because when it opened at 24, then I thought, okay, I'm taking Iowa. Now at 18, maybe not.
I'm borderline. You can see my score is kind of borderline on it. It'll probably be one of the games I'll stay away from. We'll be interested to see what your guy Steve Merrill has to say on it.
Oh, yeah. We've already recorded. It should be posted here soon. And, of course, he had his under-the-radar selection this week as well. But, yeah, he had Ohio State, Iowa. Yeah, I'm trying to recall what his thoughts were there. But we'll have that posted here
Tell you
soon.
what, Rogers, you better start taking some Merrill picks to beef up that record of yours right there, buddy. It's not been good this year.
We do it the honest way, Dave. It's all me. Whether the ship sinks or not, it's all Rogers. I want no advice from anyone.
Hey, one last thought on the game this week. I'll probably talk to you tomorrow, but in any case, does Missouri get exploited as a fraud this week against Texas A&M?
Meaning, do they lose? Probably.
I could see that. If there's what's the line on that game, by the way?
Texas A&M is a 1.5 point favorite.
Basically a pick'em game. And Missouri's ranked in the top 10.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. They could be exposed as a fraudulent, very fraudulent top 10 team, which I think we both agree that they are, right, Mark?
Yeah, I believe so. We've seen enough. Vanderbilt, Boston College.
Yep. They're like teetering. Let me ask you one last one, Mark.
Sure.
Cal over Miami. Teetering.
Straight up?
Yes. Cal to pull the upset. What about an upset of the week right there? Early upset.
Well, we know that there will be upsets. And I need to go back and count up all the double-digit upsets because I was tracking that after 2 weeks. We were at 8 after 2 weeks. That's a fair assessment right there.
I know that's a more meatier one, I think, but we don't. What do you got? 85 Miami shows still, Mark? Is that or have you cut down on the amount of Miami shows that you had? Let's say 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Okay. You had a ton of them for a while, Mark. You figured you bring more back now that they're a legit top 10 team. Maybe a playoff team.
They were falling in my lap, so hey, people were showing up for them. So.
There you go. Yeah, but I could see that. I think Miami flirted with disaster last week against Virginia Tech. I wouldn't be surprised.
And speaking of programming notes, people out there should know that we have an Indiana channel now
Yes.
A Rutgers channel is coming soon, and we've got an Ole Miss channel.
You know, the interesting candidates for Coach of the Year in the Big Ten. I do you think everybody's already given it to Kurt Signetti over there at Indiana? I mean,
It's his to lose at this point. Not that I care about coaches of the year.
well, hey, you know, it's good to see Indiana football was doing pretty well, though. I mean, I give them credit. I mean, that they're playing pretty well, and the guy called his shot. He called out programs. Give him credit. He was like, he even admitted that was his Jim Tressel moment. You know what I mean?
Jim Tressel did it in a little bit classier manner.
Well, that's true.
And let's not forget that Kurt Signetti has yet to play any of those 3 teams that he called out.
True. Easy to say it when you're not playing them that week, right, Mark?
But Indiana, this is fun to watch. And if you would have caught us maybe 45 minutes ago, we were actually dissecting all of these fringe possible breakthrough teams in the Big Ten and looking at their schedules between Rutgers, Indiana, some of these other teams, and the possibility of a crazy tie for second place or some kind of 4-way tie for first. There's a lot of crazy possibilities out there.
Yeah, that Rutgers-Nebraska game will be interesting. Does Nebraska again in a close game? Hey, I'm a believer in Matt Rule, and I think Rayola's got a bright future. I do think within the next 2 or 3 years, that could be a 9-3, 10-2 football team knocking on the door for a playoff spot. But I don't know. I still think they blew the Illinois game, though, Mark. I think they let one get away that they shouldn't have there. And I wouldn't be surprised to see them do the same thing to Rutgers. That's all I'm saying, long and short of it.
No, I would not be surprised. They are a full touchdown favorite.
Yeah, well, that'll be an interesting one. Hey, you going to do the call-in show again tomorrow night?
I believe we will. We could be on
action.
a bit late. We've got Oregon, Michigan State. If it's a blowout, we'll come on early. If it's down to the wire, we won't. So we shall see.
Well, I am maybe possibly attending the Hoban Walsh game tomorrow, which should be very interesting. Walsh, produced such alums as Mike Vrabel and Connor Cook, who was a standout. I saw play in high school at Walsh. Yeah, I was at his game once. He threw 3 interceptions. I said, this guy's terrible. Guy behind me says he's going to Michigan State. I'm like, really? I'm like, who knew?
And then on for a brief stay with the Raiders.
Right. Yeah. It turned into a really good college quarterback, Connor Cook.
Yep.
So looking forward to that one. My buddy Chuck on Bucks, who, by the way, hosts a really good Buckeye podcast, maybe as a future guest on the Mark Rogers Show.
Okay. I'm unaware, but we would certainly love to have great guests on.
Okay. Well, always a pleasure, Mark. And call-in show after the games tomorrow night, right?
Absolutely.
All right, my friend. You have a good night now.
Thanks, Dave. All right. That should do it. We've been on for 2 hours and 3 minutes. I was anticipating 1 hour unless we had support for more, which we have not. So we do appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. Again, the deal on Friday is that we will come on after the games if the games are good. If the games suck and they're blowouts, then we will just cut to the chase and get on here as soon as possible. But if Oregon and Michigan State are going at it 30-27 in the fourth quarter, I'm going to be watching the game. And then I'll be on after the game with all of you. If it's a blowout, as expected, we'll be on earlier. All right. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football, and we will see you on Friday night. Enjoy the football. College football is even more exciting with some action on the line. And the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Let's start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread. I've got a 40-year track record. In fact, in 2023, at $100 played per game, you would have netted over $9,300. And guess what? I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill, our ace in the hole, show stopper from Wager Talk. 6 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly Under the Radar pick, which went 21-5 against the spread the last 2 seasons. I repeat, 21-5 against the spread. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Steve Dace and Matt Zemek. Become a YouTube channel member or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2024 a winner now.